Greetings! I'm Roberto Valdez, Master of the Science of Geography and instructor at Northern New Mexico College in Española, New Mexico. I would like to introduce you to basic landforms and bodies of water and their characteristics, which require you to identify landforms and bodies of water using some basic vocabulary and to understand the differences between each type. Now, after seeing this presentation, I hope you will have your existing knowledge about landforms and bodies of water reinforced or corrected. You'll acquire some improved vocabulary of lexicons, which are special words naming the physical characteristics of places. I hope that you'll be able to describe and compare each landform or body of water associated with their name. I hope that you'll be able to identify on any map or satellite photograph the Earth's major landforms and bodies of water on it. Now, landforms are shapes or positions of physical features on the surface of the Earth. They in turn have a variety of soil types, sand, rocks, or water covering their surfaces. And they're shaped by nature, and most have taken thousands, if not millions of years to form. I hope that you will come away learning some new words, maybe that you have not used very much in your daily conversation before, like plateau, delta, peninsula, and isthmus. And perhaps you will even be able to identify on the photograph shown what this is in one word, or two words at least. Landforms rest upon the Earth's crust, which is called the lithosphere, herein shown. This crust is a rocky covering upon and around the Earth. That crust rests upon a worldwide sphere of hot plastic material, or mineral I should say, called the asthenosphere, and below that an even hotter mantle. Now, for the most part, we won't be using the word lithosphere, we'll use the word crust. And the crust, as well as the word tectonic plate, which will be explained further later on in this presentation. Upon this crust are a variety of materials. That which is a mixture of crushed rock and pieces of dead material from plants and animals is called dirt. Particles that have settled on the Earth's surface and are moved around by wind, water, or ice is called sediment. Coming from both inorganic and organic sources, particles such as are carried as a load by our own Rio del Norte or Rio Grande del Norte are suspended if they're light, and depending on the strength of the current, of course, but they also bounce or roll along the bottoms or sides. The continents occupy 30% of the planet, the surface that is, and all the landforms that are going to be featured in this presentation are up on these continents. There are 7 continents, and they are named North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and the one at the bottom of the world, Antarctica. Now, this is in contrast with the amount of ocean there is. Continents are the largest landforms, and they sit on top of one or more plates of the Earth's crust called a tectonic plate. Beneath the Earth's crust is the magma or molten rock that circulates. This magma can break through to the surface through vents that form kinds of mountains called volcanoes. Depicted here is the eruption of Mount St. Helens in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States that erupted in 1980. Now, different crusts called tectonic plates move. They slide, they pull apart, or they collide, or they rub against each other, ever so slightly but on a massive scale. In regions where tectonic plates collide against each other, one tectonic plate slides under the other, an action called subduction. As one tectonic plate slides under and partially melts, such as depicted in this illustration here, partially melting, bodies of hot magma or melted rock rise upwards, very slowly of course. And not all the time does this magma, when it reaches the surface, would be called lava, does lava break out to the surface. Sometimes, like the mountain shown here, it is hot gases and ash that are expelled. So, rows of these volcanoes can sometimes form at the edges of where tectonic plates are colliding. And as depicted in the illustration, the plate that slides under is, in this case, underwater, and leads to the formation of a chain of islands, which are essentially underwater volcanoes. But others are much inland, like Mount St. Helens shown here. Oceans are the largest bodies of water on Earth, and each of them has their own characteristics. So remember with this that there are 7 continents and 5 oceans. Oceans contain salt water, and smaller portions of them are sometimes called seas. But all total, they cover the 70% of the surface of the Earth. The area where an ocean touches the land is called a coast, and they usually have a sandy area called a beach. But as you can see, there are places where rock and soil can come right down to the edge of the water. Either way, it's still called a coast. Now, a recess of the coast into mainland and forming a body of water that is directly connected to the large body of water, like the ocean, is a bay. A bay. In Spanish, it's called a bahia. It can also be an extension of a lake itself into land. Now, this is in contrast to a very large bay that is an extension of the ocean, and this is called a gulf. The one here depicted is called the Gulf of Mexico, and is almost completely encircled by the North American continent. And at its opening right here, out to the Atlantic Ocean, there lies the island of Cuba. So not all islands are giant, of course, like Cuba. Some are very small. Basically, an island is any area of dry or relatively dry land that is surrounded by water or by a low wetland. As I've shown you beforehand, volcanic eruptions in the oceans can form islands. A peculiar kind with a ring shape is the mouth of the crater of an island, of an extinct, I should say, not an island, but of an extinct volcano that is mostly underneath the surface of the water. So you only see the top lip of the crater, and when it protrudes like that, it forms a peculiar island called an atoll. Atoll. These encircle a lagoon, and that's just a kind of, it looks like a lake, but it's really just an enclosed part of the ocean. And not all of them form a perfect ring, as you can see. Some of them are even C-shaped, some of them are just dots of islands, more or less roughly forming a ring, but most of it is beneath the surface. Nevertheless, a lot of these atolls have what they call a coral reef. A coral reef is just a building up of calcium that makes the atoll larger, built up by the action of little sea creatures. Now, a chain or a group of islands is called an archipelago. Archipelago. The CH forms a hard K sound. Archipelago. Now, the one shown here is a very large one occupied by a great variety of different people that form the sovereign nation of Indonesia. The most densely populated island in the world is Java, herein shown right here. It has 135 million people and 60% of the total population of Indonesia. North of that is Borneo, right here, Borneo, the 3rd largest island in the world, part of the Indonesian archipelago. Something that can look like an island but is connected on one side to the mainland by a strip extending out into a body of water is a peninsula. This one is in Europe. This one example of peninsula is the Florida Peninsula, upon which is established the political state of Florida. It's also in Spanish called la Florida. Another example is the Iberian Peninsula. This is where the sovereign nations of Portugal, right in here, and Spain rest upon, the Iberian Peninsula. One of our funnier landforms is named after some kind of article of clothing that you wear over your shoulders. Now, this is a strip of land extending out into a body of water. And instead of a strip resembling a neck, there's a large mass of land forming a triangle. It's called a cape. And these prominent protrusions of land were sometimes something to pilot boats and ships around. But because they stick out in water, they were useful for putting a lighthouse to help shipping during times of darkness or when there was fog. And notice here on the right, this peninsula in Croatia contrasts with the cape shown here, which is triangular shaped almost. Where mainland is narrow and connects two large areas of land, something appearing like a neck is called an isthmus. An isthmus. It separates two larger bodies of water. So, for example, here is the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Isthmus of Tehuantepec. Now, it's in southern Mexico, and it separates the Gulf of Mexico from the Pacific Ocean. Another famous one is the Isthmus of Panama, right here at Panama. A reverse image of an isthmus is where two large bodies of land that don't touch cause a narrow neck of the sea, and this is called a strait. An example is shown here below, in which we have the Iberian Peninsula is separated from the continent of Africa by just 9 miles of ocean water. This is called the Strait of Gibraltar. Strait of Gibraltar, or in Spanish, Gibraltar. Nevertheless, when you have two large bodies of water connected by a narrow neck of the sea, this is called a strait. Now, when there is a large inlet of ocean into a gap of the mainland, this is called a sound. Sound, as in what you hear, but it's not what you hear. This is instead a narrow channel or set of channels. This one in the Pacific Northwest at the state of Washington is called Puget Sound and allows ocean vessels to penetrate quite far into the mainland, which gave rise to a prominent city called Seattle, a seaport city about 140 miles inland from the open ocean. Now, this is a lake. A lake is a natural body of water surrounded by land. Most are filled with fresh water. They're extremely numerous all over the earth, and they are inland. That is to say, they're not part of an open ocean. The one shown here is a famous high country lake in the Rocky Mountains of the state of Colorado, in the Maroon Bells Range, called Maroon Lake. It's at about 9,600 feet above the sea level in elevation, and sea level in turn is the average level of the sea at the coast. When a man-made impoundment of a body of water, such as because of a dam, creates an artificial lake, this is called a reservoir. So the difference between a reservoir and a lake is that a reservoir is man-made. Abiquiu Reservoir, which is northwest from Espanola, about 35 miles, started to rise when a dam was completed across the Rio Chama in the early 1960s. Now, shown at the top is a photo of the river, the Rio Chama, at a place they call in Spanish La Vega de Riaño. La Vega de Riaño. And this is how it appeared in 1889. And in the backdrop of it is the famous mountain called Cerro Pedernal. Cerro Pedernal. On the bottom is the same location in the year 2003. So you can see that the effects of the dam covered this place with water, an impoundment, they call it, of water, which is a reservoir. A river is a long flowing body or stream of water flowing through land, usually to empty into a larger body of water, such as another river, a lake, or even the ocean. An example shown here is has a serpentine course, and this makes what we call a meandering river. The verb meander is the word to use for the Cretaceous rivers. So this is a meandering river. Rivers carry sediment, and so when they empty into another body, they lose the energy of their flow and they drop the sediments at their mouth. This builds a low-lying fan of land, often having branches of the stream. This is called a delta. And in the photograph immediately above me is the vast desert of the northeast of Africa, called the Egyptian Desert. and through it flows the life-giving river called the River Nile. The Nile then forms the Nile Delta. The Nile Delta is where the river is emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. The separations of a river or stream branching off from and flowing away from the main stream are called distributaries. Distributaries. The river at the left is what they call a braided river, where lots of sediment and silt and the slow speed of the water, and also not enough water, it makes the river break apart from its main channel into these branches called distributaries. The even better definition is shown in the photograph above me, which shows the deposition of sediment and the breaking off of smaller channels from the main course of the river at the delta. These are called, again, distributaries. Let's look at this, a mountain. This is a relatively high place relative to the land around it, and it makes up the highest landforms on Earth. Many, but not all, are cone-shaped, and they have steep sides and a pointed tip called a peak. So very tall ones can be snow-covered during the summer season here in New Mexico and in the south of the state of Colorado. A mountain doesn't necessarily have to have a clear peak. Some have a gentle slope at their top, and they form some kind of what they call a summit or highest point of the mountain. Now, a mountain that is much lower, say 600 feet or lower, is a hill. And this is a mound of raised land that is smaller than a mountain. There's no exact definition. Many people have different ideas of what a hill, how high a hill should be before it's considered a mountain. But those that are roundish are called rolling hills. And when hills have abrupt changes in grade, they have ravines or precipices, they are called broken hills. So on the top photograph you will see an example of rolling hills, which are west of what we call the San Jose del Chama, or the town of Hernandez. And below is an arroyo called Arroyo de Lemita, nearby, where there are broken hills, which is somewhat to the northwest of Chile. Both of these places are northwest of Española. So rolling hill has rolling roundish features. Broken hills are abrupt and broken. We often call the irregular hills around us that are broken in Spanish as arrugas. Arrugas, meaning wrinkles. A natural depression or relatively low area enclosed by higher land is a basin. Now, it can be a wide enclosed valley, and some have no outlet of water runoff to the sea, either through an arroyo or through a river. The American Southwest, El Norte Mexicano, has many basins with these dry lake beds that hearken to a time when the climate was wetter. Shown in the photograph is the Llano de San Agustin, which is an enclosed basin because it is encircled by mountains, and has evidence of a dry lake bed. Another example of a basin is a circular depression nestled among the high country mountains, and it is specifically called a cirque. A cirque is a kind of basin. These bowl-shaped valleys or basins were carved out by heavy snowpack during the Ice Age, and this snowpack turned into ice and carved out these round basins through the slow action of movement downhill. A river of ice. It in turn is called a glacier. Now, a valley is a linear depression in the Earth's surface that generally slopes from one end to the other and is bounded on both sides by a higher elevation of some sort, mountains, hills, or benches. This low-lying area is usually located between higher lands, such as the mountain ranges or hills. Valleys can be narrow, but for many in New Mexico, a valley is characterized as being pretty wide open. And this is typical, such as in the picture above, which is an area of probably in Nevada, and below a valley in Arizona. Others have a definition of valley to be much narrower. But nevertheless, in many examples, valleys formed by the action of rivers flowing down from the sides of mountains involve rivers running over these rock faces, crashing down, forming what they call a waterfall or falls. So on the left, they call this one Yosemite Valley, and you can see in the distance a waterfall. Now, when two streams or rivers meet each other, this is often called a confluence. But when you have a smaller stream meeting or flowing into a larger one, this is called a tributary. Now, the difference between a tributary and a distributary that I showed you earlier is the difference between streams that join and streams that branch off. Now, when the water flow unites with another flow, this is called a tributary. And these make a river system look like it has branches. So again, a tributary is when a stream flows into another, usually larger. That intersection is called a tributary. In many places, canyons form by the action of rivers as well, but are characterized as being narrow with steep sides. They can also be formed by intermittent streams like arroyos. In many examples, they are coincident with fault lines or cracks in the Earth's crust, and some still show activity in the form of earthquakes. Now, shown here is an example of a canyon called Navajo Canyon at Mesa Verde in today's southwestern Colorado. They made it into a national park because of its archaeological sites. Again, a canyon is typified by having narrow and steep sides. Or actually, I mean to say that they are narrow and have steep sides. A plain is a comparatively level, flat region on the Earth's surface. It's generally uniform slope and of considerable extent, in other words, large. Plains have gently rolling hills and may include grasslands or prairies. On the photo below the top photo shows a plain, a general plain that's also a grassland, and the bottom one is in New Mexico. Now, they are also known as llano in Spanish. Llano. The one on the bottom shows a bottom area that's relatively flat and a top area that's relatively flat. The top has a hard layer of rock called a cap rock and forms the upper elevation of another plain. The long meandering slope separating the upper from the lower one is called an escarpment. And this escarpment is, the shot itself is at the Llano Estacado, or Staked Plains. This is in eastern New Mexico, and it is the northwest escarpment of the Llano Estacado, overlooking the Alamogordo Valley, somewhat near Tucumcari and Santa Rosa. So again, a plain is a flat region with uniform slope and of considerable extent, and may even include grasslands or prairies. Now, when a large flat area is near oceans, these are called coastal plains. They're basically the same thing we just looked at, but they are specific in that they have a coast, therefore coastal plain. There's a broad one on the eastern seaboard of the North American continent, comprising whereupon sit many of the eastern states of the United States. A plateau, E-A-U, making the sound ew. Plateau is a flat area higher than surrounding land with a very steep or having very steep sides. And these steep slopes or even vertical rock faces, they're called cliffs. Now, shown in is the Colorado Plateau. And here I'll show you another view of it. This one is a map showing the four corners states of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico are overlaid upon what they call the Colorado Plateau. Shown here, various views of it. The upper view, as you can see, displays some cliffs. The lower view is a part of the Colorado Plateau through which the Rio San Juan flows. It is in the southern part of the state of Utah. And because of the peculiar rock layers and the climate itself and the way that the plateau is raised up above abruptly, causing the rivers to have to saw their way through them, they form these very deep canyons with precipices. So now I have to tell you what a precipice is. It's one and the same with cliff. It's easier to remember cliff, however. So precipices or rock faces that are less than perfectly vertical, these can also be called cliffs. And they all tend to have rims, and these are upper meandering edges of a precipice. Shown here is a sandstone cliff called Peñasco Amarillo del Cañón. So Peñasco in Spanish, bluff, prominence, promontory, crag. All of these are large rocks that have a vertical or almost vertical faces, rock faces, and these are called universally, in general, cliffs. Here in the background in the photograph is a row of cliffs with a top rim, also called precipice, of course. Desert, this is in a region of a desert, and that is a region characterized by being hot, dry, and receives little or no rain. Even though their days can be hot, their nights can be extremely cold, and some deserts can even be covered in ice, such as those in the southern continent of Antarctica. Believe it or not, vast areas of the continent of Antarctica, they don't receive much precipitation, but what it does receive does not melt, and that's why there's so much snow there. Shown here in the photograph is an area just east of St. George, Utah. Now you will have noticed that due to the shortage of water, many desert areas contain only a few plants, so these winds can sweep sediment, such as from a river, from arroyo sediments deposited, or from an ancient lake bed, and gather it as sand. So large areas within deserts can be covered in these sand hills, and they're called dunes, sometimes called sand dunes, but in general, dunes. Above, in the photograph above, is the famous white sands in New Mexico in the Tularosa Basin. It's 200 miles south of Española. And on the photograph below that, where I'm overlaid my image, is the Great Sand Dunes in the Valle San Luis in the state of Colorado, and that's about 125 miles north of Española. Both of these, their sand is comprised of sediment that was wind-blown from ancient lake beds. Among some of the features in deserts are mesas. Mesas. Now, you'll hear people mispronounce it quite often as mesa, but it is mesa because it comes from the Spanish word for tableland, and of course it has an E in it. Now, tables, whether they're kitchen tables, can also be applied to geographic features, and they typically result from the fact that there's this horizontal layer of hard rock protecting some softer soil or softer rock beneath it. And so as a result, they form these flat, or at least slanted flat shapes. Shown on the photograph at upper left is Mesita Blanca near the town of Cañones, New Mexico. Shown in the photograph at below left is a large mesa called Mesa de las Viejas, which means tableland of the old women, due to a legend of there being old Apaches accused of witchcraft living at this location. And on the photograph, of which my image is almost overlaying, is Mesita or Mesa del Pueblo Quemado. Now, look closely at the photograph of Mesa del Pueblo Quemado to the extreme right, and you will notice what appears to be a smaller type of mesa cut off from the main larger mesa. What is that? Let's answer that question. A butte. When a mesa is so small and eroded as to make a sort of promontory or prominent rock, it's called a butte. Now, this is an isolated hill or mountain, but with steep sides and a cliff face. Shown below is Merrick's Butte in Monument Valley of the state of Arizona, and above is Fajada Butte in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. Both of these buttes are features within the larger Colorado Plateau. So what happens when you get erosion to reduce an extension of a mesa or a butte themselves into something even narrower still. Well, this is called a pillar. Now, a pillar is a general word like basin. It's a catch-all for more specific words. They can have a variety of shapes. They're usually vertical. They stand up. They can be called spires or pinnacles. They're nevertheless sharp pinnacle-shaped rock formations, as well as balanced rocks, such as the one shown at the left. That is a photograph of a balanced rock, the balanced rock, at near Moab, Utah. The photograph at the very top is a mesa near Bernalillo, New Mexico. But on the extreme of its right-hand side, you will notice a small nub or thumb sticking up. That is the core of an ancient lava vent, and it's formed essentially a type of antler. That's how it's conceptualized in Spanish. The name of the mesa is Mesa del Cangilón, or Mesa of the Antler. The photograph on the bottom, just where my image is overlaid, this is called Tse Wen Widi. Tse Wen Widi. Tse is eagle, Wen Widi, tail and point. This is an area near Namben, New Mexico, and these are areas of where softer material is protected by a harder cap rock or layering of rock. But they've become isolated. They have become types of pillars. So in conclusion, I hope that you have had your existing knowledge that you had about landforms reinforced if you already knew a lot of these names. But if you were using them wrongly, I hope that you have had them corrected with this presentation. And otherwise, I hope that you've expanded your vocabulary of lexicons or special words to describe the landforms or bodies of water that exist upon the earth, and that now you'll be able to, on a map, a satellite photograph, or in person in the great outdoors, be able to identify some of these things and use the names that you have learned in your daily conversation. Again, I am Roberto Valdez, Master of the Science of Geography and instructor at Northern New Mexico College in Española, New Mexico. Thank you for watching.